So this is talking about basically the teleconnection part of Atlantic multi-decadal variability and how that relates to the U.S. hydroclimate and North American hydroclimate. And I wanted to get this one because it's kind of nice to show this relationship in the observation. This is based on the Palmer Drought Severity Index from the tree ring data, the Cook et al. Atlas. And what's shown here is in the lines are PC number 1 of US PDSI, which is basically the western US drought pattern. And then the stripe here is the tree ring PDSI averaged west of 90 west, which basically agrees with the line. And that shows you can see there's a prolonged, the drought period here, the drought period here, and then more wet period in those other period. And then the color is showing the AMO or AMV. And what you see is with negative AMV, it shows, connects with wet US hydroclimate, and PDSI in this case. And the warm phase of AMV is associated with the dry conditions in the same region. So if we do the regression to see the spatial pattern of this linkage between the AMV and the PDSI, you get these plots there. Actually, I'm showing here on the top here is the forced one, forced component. I'll explain what do I mean by forced. It's not a simple trend, but actually a signal noise UF analysis based on model, but I'll show you later. And this is the AMV regression, and this is the Nino 3.4 and the negative Nino 3.4. So we know on the annual time scale there's a lot of drought in the US is connected with the negative Nino, so the La Nina condition. But AMV on the decadal time scale is showing a very widespread drought condition in the US. And the forced component shows more of east-west sort of pattern. West is drying, but east is not. So AMV seem to be more widespread, showing a widespread linkage to the US hydroclimate. So I summarize here both forced warming, positive AMV, and La Nina contributed drought condition, but it seems like AMV on a longer time scale. These are all filtered on a decadal time scale and longer. And in the earlier study, we looked at the observation and model connection between AMV and the hydroclimate. And what's shown here, interestingly, is that these are based on CMIP5, actually, the set of models that we looked at. What's interesting here is that in observation, you see it's not very clear, I guess showing up here, is a very strong dry condition in terms of precipitation over North America, whereas that's not clearly shown up in the models. So models are underestimating the dry condition associated with the warm phase of AMV, even though the AMV itself, spatial pattern-wise on this column here, shows a pretty similar pattern. These are for the 20th century simulation, 21st, and pre-industrial. They all seem to show up in a very similar horseshoe sort of pattern of AMV, whereas the hydroclimate implications are much stronger in observation than in models. And these are just showing the time series on the left. And what's also interesting is we notice that there is some discrepancy in the Pacific domain. The top is observation. There's, again, the colors are not showing up, but it's a negative in the Nino region, whereas in the models, they tend to associate with kind of a warm Pacific SST. So the question is, are these linked together? The lack of hydroclimate response in North America and this bias in the model seem to have AMV positive linked to the warm phase of ENSO. And here's just looking at both winter and the summer season, the bias seem to be there. The observation has a much stronger linkage, so I'm going to just skip that. So here are a few of the questions we want to address using the CMIP5 models. How well is the positive AMV North American drought relationship depicted in the CMIP5 models compared to, say, the previous version? And the interplay between ENSO and AMV, is that an important thing? And in addition to that, what we find is the importance of stratosphere pathways being emphasized in a lot of studies, and we try to separate models with high top versus low top and see if there's anything we can learn from this set of different set of models. And ultimately want to understand the possible mechanism for this AMV positive and US drought relationship. So we use a subset of the CMIP5 here. The main reason is simply because we use PDSI, so it's being calculated for these 15 models only. We could have extended to the whole set of the CMIP5, the 30-some models. We'll be using signal noise UF, which we used in previous studies to separate the radiated forced component and the natural component. And then we'll use regression to sort of look at the relationship between the PDSI, precipitation, surface temperature, relation to AMV, and also the forced component in some of the plots. And again, we'll be looking at models with high top versus low top just to learn about the role of stratosphere in this case. So here are the 15 CMIP5 models. And again, some of them has high top. High top here is defined as model top above 1 hectopascal. And so 6 of them are high top and 9 of them are low top models. And when we apply the signal noise UF to these models, the 15 models, you get this first PC1 of the signal noise UF, which represents sort of a trend component or the radiative forced component with some dips down, sort of associated with volcanic aerosols. And this is the pattern of the first UF, which is showing basically global warming pattern.
What variable?
These are based on the sea surface temperature. Yeah, and what's shown here is, what's used in the analysis. And if you regress each model's ensemble mean of each models onto this PC1, you get somewhat different, trend. Some models are more sensitive than others. And what's interesting here is one of the models, this line, again, it's not very clear, the light green color, is the GFDL, one of the GFDL models. It's very flat. So when we combine, use all the models together to do regression, because it's such a small component enforced, it contributes so much to the regression. So we have to take that out because it's dominates all the patterns otherwise. So we will end up using 8 models for the low top rather than the 9 that's listed. So here's the comparison, and here you've already seen this tree regression for AMV and forced based on the Decadal results. And on the right here is the 14 models altogether, the CMIP5. And what you see is, sort of consistent with CMIP3, but a lot better than CMIP3 in the sense that it's showing up in a dry condition in the model association with positive AMV, but it's weaker compared to the observation still. And on the other hand, the forced components seem to be more widespread in the model compared to what's shown in the tree ring atlas. And this is just take a look at different component that enters the PDSI, the precipitation here in the observation model, and the surface temperature composite. I think most of the discrepancy in the PDSI that's on the right between observation at the top and the model is due to the precipitation. So you can see the precipitation in the observations tend to be stronger than in the model, even though it's not that clear in this plot. Okay, so okay, so in looking at, again, before we looked at the SST pattern, that we noticed there is this bias in the Pacific associated with the ENSO. And so we compare again here the 14 models, SST pattern, and you can see again there is this warm Pacific associated with the warm Atlantic in the model, whereas in the observation, again, the colors are, it's very weak, but it's negative in the Pacific domain. So that bias tend to be there, but compared to the CMIP3, it seemed to be less obvious, less of a warming bias, even though it is still a problem. So one of the things we did then is to see if we can regress out the ENSO signal and see if that helps with the warm AMV and US drought relationship. So this is regressing out, we call decadal ENSO, because everything is being smoothed to retain only decadal and longer time scale. And the results are slightly better. I can sort of compare to the one that you've seen before. This is with the ENSO included, and this is, this is without ENSO. So there's a slight improvement when you take out the ENSO signal, but more or less the discrepancies we saw in the one with ENSO is still there. So what else can be contributing to the, there's a delay in my hit and the computer. I think we're hitting the limit of the computer or something. So that kind of leads us to look for reasons why, what causes this discrepancy between model and observation in terms of this teleconnection between warm AMV and hydroclimate in North America. And we separate the models into high top versus low top. And what turns out to be that in the 6 high top models, and these are models with multiple realizations, so it's more than 6 realization in this case, and 8 the low top models, again with multiple realization. And we find that the bias in the Pacific in the high top models are much weaker than in the low top models. So clearly there's something interesting about the stratosphere that seem to impact the Pacific and Atlantic relationship. So our interest here is more into the, looking at the hydroclimate relationship. So now the top now is the forced component and AMV, and this is negative Nino again for the 6 high top here and 8 low top, and observation on the at the end. Now if you look at the 6 high top in terms of the forced pattern and then the observation, you can see that it's a lot more consistent in the sense that you have more of the western U.S., western part of the continent that's dry, associated with the radiative forced component, and rather than in the low top model, which tend to have a widespread, entire North America being dry, associated with the radiative forcing. And the AMV is also improved. Now in the high top model, you see a more widespread drying over US, over North America. And then in the low top models, you see much less of a drying associated with warm phase of AMV. The ENSO connections are not that sensitive, seem to be, to the high top versus low top. All right, again, it's not moving there. So we also looked at the circulation linkage and the circulation pattern associated with the AMV is in this case, we're showing most of the plots, I should emphasize, is summer because the triggering data is really just for the summer. So we're comparing mostly to the summer season. But in terms of circulation, it's interesting to see the winter time, and also the bias in the low top models seem to be very obvious in the winter season. And so if you compare the sea level pressure regression on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of it here, the bias or the pattern of sea level pressure tend to have a lot impact due to the ENSO condition. So you're having this low illusion low here, and that's much less in the high top model. So obviously the discrepancies you see between the high and low top models tend to be associated a lot with this specific bias, as we can tell from the circulation. And okay, and this is just the summer pattern, and then you can see some of the bias I'm going to skip over. So we looked at the surface wind just to see how ENSO and AMV are linked together. And this is again the 6 high top and 8 low top models. And what you see is there's very little, wind, surface wind in the Pacific for the high top, whereas, I mean, these are for AMV versus Nino, just to kind of linking them together. Whereas in the low top model, you see a much stronger component in the Pacific that is associated with the warm phase of AMV. And we're not exactly sure why, but you know, there are two possibilities. One is the circulation itself, actually generated by AMV, is forcing the Pacific in the low top model. The other way, which we think is more likely, is because some of the patterns some of the AMV patterns in the low top model may be driven by El Nino signal or the Pacific signal. And yeah, this is just the summer. So again, come back to the mechanism. Why does warmer North Atlantic lead to dry North America? So we did some moisture budget analysis and atmospheric GCM experiments. I may not have the time to show all of that. Yeah, there's my low-tech, my equation editor just stopped working, so I couldn't type all these equations. I mean, I don't need to go through the details. Basically, moisture budget analysis shows the P minus E, or the surface water balance is balanced by the total column moisture budget convergence. And you can separate this into, once you put in the mean component, monthly mean in this case, you have the mean flow moisture convergence and transient moisture convergence, and then what I'm scribbling here is the change in the moisture budget, which is the regression really in this case. We're just regressing to the pattern. And you can separate that into the mean convergence change and the mean and the transient convergence change, and the mean convergence change is partially related to either the moisture advection term or the mass divergence term. And so we'll be looking at these separate terms just very briefly. 2 minutes, okay. So if we look at the AMV regression to the moisture budget terms and the P minus E, as you can see, I put a red rectangle to show you that's where the region we're looking at. But it shows the domain from 30 south to north, and for the Atlantic domain, including, say, the Sahel as well. And what's showing up here is, you know, P minus E is showing dry, just like precipitation. It's dominated by precipitation, and that's balanced by the mean moisture convergence. And the transient, which transient is very weak or not organized. So it's mainly between mean and the P minus E are the ones that balance each other. And if you look at the mean term, that can be separated into the mean mass divergence and the moisture advection. And you can see that most of the tropical component of it, the tropical component here, is due to the mass divergence contribution. Or we interpret it as an overturning circulation change, whereas the mean advection contributes maybe to the extratropical latitude in this case, but not as much compared to the mean divergence change. So interestingly, I think this, to me, is interesting. It is the overturning circulation that directly affects the US. It's because of the increasing convection in a warm tropical Atlantic, and that then suppresses the convection over the US. So as a last thing that I want to show here, is just the high top versus low top. What is going on? Why are they different? And this is just showing the P minus E and mean moisture convergence. Really, the next one is the one. So if you look at this one, what's interesting here is that you notice the differences mainly in the strength of the tropical convection. So in the high top model, you have much stronger tropical convection compared to the low top models. And I don't have time to show you the detail, but that is very consistent with actually having the very little ANSO signal in this case, whereas you have a strong ANSO signal that compensates some of the tropical convection. And so again, you know, the result is that the tropical convection or the ANSO signal that associated with the warm AMV is the main reason for the discrepancy between these two. Okay, so I'm going to skip the GCM, which is, again, very consistent with the analysis results, and go to the summary here. So radiated forced SST warming, positive AMV, and La Nina all contribute to the drought condition in the US, but the impact of AMV tend to be more significant and widespread, at least based on the observation. And the models tend to overestimate the force component and underestimate somewhat of the AMV component, and which is partially because models tend to link positive AMV to weak El Nino condition in the tropical Pacific. And removing that ENSO signal helps, but not really solve the entire problem. And we find high top models represent much better the relationship in the observation. And the difference between the high and low is mainly because the ENSO AMV linkage is not as much in the high top, whereas it's very strong in the low top models. And in terms of mechanism, I mean, it's very preliminary, these analysis. We think the warm AMV drought and the North American drought connection seems to be made more due to the local Hadley circulation, the overturning circulation. The enhanced tropical convection suppresses the land convection in the US. So I'll stop here.
Thanks.
When it comes to sea level pressure variability and response, I thought in models what really mattered wasn't where your lid was, rather it depended on how well you resolved the upper troposphere, lower stratosphere winds. So this is my understanding of more recent literature. So you have high models that do that very poorly and get poor responses, and you have low top models that do that very well and get very good responses. So I'm wondering about your results. And so have you tested the significance of the differences that you see? Are these significant differences between the two groups?
I did. We did. I mean, we looked at first the one ensemble member each from these models. When I was presenting, and some of you heard the AMV, the AMS meeting, and then we find the results can be insignificant because you're adding more ensemble member that may change. And when we eventually added, we recalculated all the ensemble members in terms of PDSI, we find that the results are actually quite significant, the discrepancy. But what you're saying is that circulation discrepancy may be more because of the upper tropospheric.
It's a resolution issue, not a height issue.
Right, yeah. I can see what you mean here, but I mean, again, we're not exactly sure why the discrepancy we see in this case, but it is significant in terms of just, test of statistical significance.
My question was along the similar lines. I mean, all these models, high top or low top, they have different vertical resolutions, and where they are going to place their resolution makes a big difference. And maybe I missed it, but did you show, for example, in the ensemble means, 6 high top models perform better than the 8 or whatever 9 low top models?
Right.
But what is the individual spread? Do you get essentially 8 among the 8 low top models? Is there any one of them actually overlapping or doing better than the mean of the 6 high top model?
That's a very good point. I was going to say, in terms of significance, we did look at that. In terms of individual ensemble member, you definitely can find that. But in terms of ensemble mean, it's very consistent.
But in that case, in that individual ensemble member, what about the resolution and where that resolution is placed, rather than actually low top versus high top distinguishing the things? It might be simply, again, where the resolution is and whether that particular one that outperforms the mean of the 6 high top ones might be doing better simply because of something else, not necessarily high top, low top doing.
Okay, so I'll look into that a little bit more, but I mean, I also forgot to point out those are stipplings showing up in these plots, which are showing the model agreement, and they are mostly significant in that regard. But yeah, individual ensemble members can be different. Yeah.
Actually, that comment relates to a lot of different interpretations from high top versus low top models.
That's right.
We were just talking about that in relation to volcanoes, QBO. Some high top models get a QBO because they put a lot of levels where you want to get to QBO, and that would really change your answer. So
I mean, that's what I'm trying to address the section that people say, oh, you need a high top model, and that's what I'm.
Yeah, high top's not enough.
High top may not necessarily be enough, and then people may be, anyway.
But high-top models are usually higher resolution in the stratosphere. I mean, that is,
But not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
The GIST model used 23 levels and went up to 80 kilometers, so it didn't have very good vertical resolution.
Arun?
Mingfang, one comment, and you can add your thoughts to it maybe. So when you analyze these terrestrial quantities versus SST in exotropics, most of those links come through the atmospheric circulation, which is very highly chaotic. If you imply that you can replicate those relationships in an initialized decadal prediction, that's a sort of a dangerous path to go. And those it's not necessary that you could replicate that relationship in
in terms of
initialized
initialization.
predictions, because the SST has to constrain the atmosphere, and that constraint decides how much of the relationship you can replicate in a prediction mode. So if there's undercurrent here that this relationship could be used as a basis for prediction, but that may not be true.
Well, that is a question. I mean, how much you need the atmosphere in terms of decadal prediction, right? I mean, is that what?
Yeah.
That's your point.
How much you have to predict the trace of the atmosphere which produced the ocean to do the decadal prediction. And that's where things fail, because the atmosphere goes its own way. And the teleconnections you see in the individual runs, you don't seem to see in the prediction runs.
I agree. Yeah, it's something we need to consider. Yeah.
Sure.
Have you looked at the mechanism for the force response? Which forcing factors are doing it, and why is that actually light on boards?
We looked at everything basically in all of these models in terms of moisture budget. I haven't focused particularly on the forced component, but we've done all the calculations for the forced as well. Yeah, I can certainly look at it and answer your question later.